The clang of silver trays in the Moreno mansion's kitchen marked the start of Lady Amara's most unusual mission. She had lived a life of grand halls and glittering chandeliers, a woman admired for her sharp mind and wealth. Yet here she was, tying an apron around her waist and lowering her gaze like a humble servant. To the outside world, she was the respected matriarch of one of the city's wealthiest families. But to herself, she was now just Mara, the new maid in the Moreno household. She knew her son Adrian deserved more than a bride chosen for wealth or social standing. He needed someone whose heart was kind, whose soul was steady, and whose love would not waver in shadows. The Moreno family presented a spotless picture in the city of Bellwood, a place where elegance covered secrets like velvet drapes over cracked walls. Mr. Roland Moreno and his wife Celine appeared charitable and noble, often praising themselves for adopting Elena, a girl with no family name and no inheritance. The townspeople admired their generosity, unaware that inside their mansion Elena lived more as a servant than a daughter. The Moreno sisters Clara, Yvette, Marina, and Lucia looked down on her, calling her the charity girl whenever guests weren't listening. They used her presence to polish their reputation, all the while sharpening their cruelty against her like knives hidden behind smiles. Lady Amara noticed this the moment she began working in the household. Elena was the one who greeted her with warmth, though she was supposed to be above the servants. She offered to show her where linens were kept, where the tea leaves were stored, and even whispered to her, "Don't take it personally when they treat you coldly. It isn't you. That's just how they are." There was a kindness in Elena's tone that carried no bitterness, even after years of mistreatment. Amara watched her closely, curious about how someone so unloved by those around her could still give so freely of her heart. The Moreno sisters, meanwhile, lived like queens. Clara, the eldest, walked with her nose always tilted high, as though the ground beneath her did not deserve acknowledgement. Yvette was sharp-tongued, finding flaws in everyone but herself. Marina loved to flaunt her gowns, never wearing the same dress twice if she could help it. And Lucia, the youngest, often followed the cruelty of the others, echoing their mockery just to be included. Amara polished tables, carried tea, and served at dinners, all while pretending not to notice when the sisters snapped their fingers at her or dismissed her as invisible. Yet she was watching, listening, and piecing together the truth. One evening, when Mr. Roland invited close friends for supper, Elena was tasked with arranging the flowers in the grand hall. She carefully trimmed roses and lilacs, her hands gentle as though each petal carried a story worth preserving. Amara caught the way Clara walked by and deliberately knocked over the vase, the water spilling across Elena's gown. Clara feigned surprise, laughing lightly. "Oh dear, Elena, clumsy again? You must try harder." Guests chuckled politely, believing Clara's lie, but Amara saw the smirk hidden in her eyes. She saw, too, how Elena knelt quietly, blotting the water with her apron without protest, her dignity held firm in silence. Moments like these struck Amara deeply. The Lawsons, or rather, the Morenos, wanted the world to believe their daughters were paragons of grace, yet what she witnessed was a steady stream of arrogance and unkindness. Only Elena shone differently, like a candle in a storm. She did not seek to outshine them. She simply existed with a heart that refused to grow hard. Despite the soil she had been planted in, Amara's heart ached as she thought of Adrian, her only son. He was away at a business seminar, unaware of the mission his mother had embarked upon. She remembered the day she told him, "Love must be tested not by wealth, but by character." Adrian had laughed softly, teasing, "Mother, you sound like a philosopher." Yet he had trusted her wisdom. He did not know she would go so far as to disguise herself, slip into another family's home, and scrub dishes with her own hands. But Amara had seen enough society women who glittered in ballrooms but lacked compassion. She would not let her son's future rest on appearances alone. There was another evening when Amara overheard Celine praising her daughters loudly in front of visitors, speaking of their refinement and accomplishments. Then, almost as an afterthought, she gestured toward Elena. "And of course, we've been generous enough to provide this one with a home. Without us, she would have been on the streets." The guests nodded approvingly, murmuring about the family's kindness. Elena stood silently in the corner, her eyes downcast, her face betraying nothing. Amara, however, noticed her hands tightening into fists against her apron, the only sign of the sting those words carried. Later, when the hall was empty, Amara approached Elena while folding napkins. "Does it ever get easier, being spoken about? Like that?" she asked gently. Elena looked startled, then gave a faint smile. "It never feels good, but I've learned not to measure myself by their words. I just keep doing what is right. That's what keeps me strong." Amara felt a lump in her throat. She was not easily moved. She had lived through betrayals, business wars, and the loneliness of widowhood. But this girl, with nothing but quiet resilience, stirred something deep inside her. The more days passed, the clearer the contrast became. The Moreno daughters carried themselves with polished arrogance, never missing a chance to mock Elena when no outsiders were watching. Yet Elena treated the cooks, gardeners, and even the stable boys with respect, thanking them, listening to their troubles, and sometimes sharing a piece of bread she had saved. Amara noticed how the staff gravitated toward her, drawn by the warmth of someone who treated them as human rather than tools. That night, when Amara laid on her small cot in the maid's quarters, she reflected on all she had seen. She thought of Adrian's father, who had passed years ago, leaving her with the responsibility of guiding their son wisely. She whispered to herself, "If only you could see her, you'd understand why I must be here." She closed her eyes, already convinced that destiny had led her to Elena, but the test was only beginning. Soon, Adrian would return, and the Morenos would put forth their daughters like gems in a display case. The sisters would smile sweetly, their parents would sing praises, and the town would cheer for whichever union was announced. None of them knew that the maid in the corner, the one carrying trays and keeping her eyes lowered, was Lady Amara, the true gatekeeper of Adrian's future. And none of them suspected that she had already found the heart she believed worthy of her son. The first stage of her mission was complete. She had stepped into the Moreno mansion, lived among them, and uncovered the truth hidden beneath their polished surfaces. Now, she only had to wait for Adrian's return, and for the real testing to begin. The day Adrian Moreno returned to Bellwood began with quiet anticipation inside the Moreno mansion. Servants rushed to polish every rail and corner. The sisters took extra hours with their gowns and hair, and Mrs. Celine rehearsed phrases of praise she intended to offer in his presence. To them, Adrian was not just a wealthy heir returning home, he was a golden opportunity. Each of the Moreno sisters imagined herself by his side, and their parents nurtured dreams of alliances, contracts, and the grand expansion of their already glittering reputation. None of them suspected that the maid pouring their tea was Adrian's own mother, Lady Amara, watching every gesture like a hawk behind gentle eyes. Adrian entered with the confident ease of a man accustomed to boardrooms and negotiations, but his smile softened as he greeted the family. Clara was the first to step forward, her hands delicately folded as though she were posing for a painting. "Adrian, we are so honored to welcome you back. You must tell us all about your travels." Yvette followed with a dramatic laugh. "Oh yes, and perhaps you might need someone to show you around town again. Who is better than us?" Marina twirled slightly in her silk dress, her voice sugary. "I've been working on my music, Adrian. You must let me play for you after dinner." And Lucia, eager not to be left behind, chimed in, "We've all missed you." Truly. Adrian smiled politely at each of them, but his gaze wandered when he caught sight of Elena carrying a tray of water toward the dining table. Her steps were steady, her eyes lowered, but there was something about her presence that drew his attention more than the sisters' carefully rehearsed charms. She placed the glasses gently, whispering, "Excuse me," before retreating toward the kitchen. Adrian's eyes followed her, and Lady Amara, from her corner, noticed. The days that followed tested Elena in ways she could not have imagined. The Moreno sisters, realizing Adrian's glances often drifted toward the quiet adopted girl rather than themselves, devised schemes to tarnish her image. Clara, sharp-minded though cruel, whispered to her sisters, "If Adrian sees her as flawless, we must show him otherwise. She must appear untrustworthy." Yvette smirked, "Leave it to me. Tomorrow, the necklace." The plan unfolded during breakfast. Celine's diamond necklace, a gift from Roland, suddenly went missing. Panic swept through the household as maids turned over cushions, and searched drawers. Clara's voice rose above the commotion. Perhaps not all in this house respect what is not theirs. Her eyes slid toward Elena. The sisters echoed her suspicion with perfectly timed gasps. Elena froze, startled by the accusation. I would never, she stammered, her hands trembling. Adrian stepped forward, his tone calm but firm. Let's search properly before throwing accusations. Amara, standing silently in the corner, had already noticed Yvette slipping something under Elena's pillow earlier that morning. She kept her silence, waiting for the truth to surface. When a maid returned minutes later, holding the necklace aloft and announcing it had been found in Elena's room, gasps filled the hall. Clara clasped her hand to her chest. Oh, how unfortunate! Elena's eyes filled with tears, but before she could defend herself, Adrian walked over, studied the necklace, and said, curious. This clasp is broken. My mother had the same piece once, and it never broke. He looked toward Elena with kindness. If you were going to steal, wouldn't you choose something whole, not damaged? The question silenced the room. Amara's lips twitched in the faintest smile. She had raised her son well. His logic and fairness cut sharper than any blade. The sisters, realizing their first plot had crumbled, exchanged frustrated glances. Elena whispered, thank you, though her voice shook. Later, when she passed Amara in the hallway, she paused. Strange, isn't it? How quickly people believe the worst of you. Amara touched her arm gently. Yes, but truth has a way of surviving schemes. You held yourself with dignity that matters more than you know. Not long after, another plot surfaced. Marina suggested to her sisters, Father's private study holds documents he values more than gold. What if Elena is caught snooping? Adrian would never trust her again. They waited for the perfect evening when Roland left his study door ajar. Marina slipped inside, ruffled papers on the desk, then slipped out just as Elena passed with a tray. Elena, Lucia cried dramatically. What are you doing near Father's private things? Roland stormed down the hallway, his brows knit in fury. No one enters that room without permission. Elena's eyes widened in horror. I wasn't, she stuttered, clutching the tray. Just then, Adrian stepped into the hall, followed closely by Amara. He bent over the desk, noticing footprints on the carpet. Interesting, he muttered. These shoes are too small to be Elena's. He turned toward Marina, whose face flushed. Yours, perhaps. Silence swallowed the hall. Marina stammered. I was just making sure the papers were safe. Roland's anger deepened. Do not play games with my trust, he barked, but his daughters lowered their eyes, murmuring apologies. Elena, though proven innocent again, simply bowed her head. She carried the sting of humiliation but did not lash out. Amara noted her composure, the way she forgave even when false accusations piled at her feet. One afternoon, as rain poured heavily outside, Amara slipped while carrying a tray of tea. She fell hard, twisting her ankle. The sisters laughed behind closed doors, but Elena rushed forward, helping her sit on a chair. Let me see, she said, her hands gentle as she checked the swelling. She tore a strip from her own apron, wrapping it firmly around the injury. You must rest, Elena insisted. Amara looked at her, her heart swelling with pride. For the first time, she almost wanted to reveal who she truly was. But she stayed silent, holding the secret a little longer. That evening, Elena brought a small meal to the quarters where Amara rested. She set the tray down, whispering, I thought you might not have eaten. Amara smiled, touched beyond words. They shared the meal together, Elena speaking of her small joys, how the garden roses calmed her, how the sound of rain reminded her of lullabies she barely remembered from childhood. Amara listened, thinking of Adrian and how well their souls might fit together. The Moreno sisters, however, did not rest. Realizing their plots were failing, they turned to the town itself. Whispers began to circulate in Bellwood. Elena was ungrateful. Elena was deceitful. Elena had a curse upon her that brought misfortune. The sisters made sure the rumors spread far enough that Adrian would hear them. And indeed, one afternoon, Adrian returned from a walk through town with his jaw clenched tight. He entered the parlor where Clara and Yvette lounged. Strange, he said, how the whole town suddenly speaks ill of your sister. Almost as if someone wanted to poison her name. Clara raised her brows innocently. Oh dear, people gossip. We can't control that. Adrian's voice sharpened. But you can. You planted those seeds. His gaze moved across all four sisters. Do you think I don't see through your games? The sisters fell silent, their practiced smiles cracking. Elena stood quietly in the corner, her cheeks flushed, unsure whether to stay or retreat. Adrian turned toward her, his voice softening. Elena, don't let their cruelty define you. I see you for who you are. The words made her eyes glisten, and for once, she allowed herself to believe that perhaps someone truly did. Amara, standing in the doorway, felt her heart settle with certainty. The bond between her son and Elena was forming naturally, tested by cruelty, yet strengthened by kindness. The Moreno sisters had tried and failed, and though battles remained ahead, Amara knew this girl was worth every test, every disguise, every ounce of patience she had carried into this household. The evening of the grand dinner in the Moreno mansion arrived like a curtain lifting for the final act of a long play. The chandeliers glittered with hundreds of tiny flames, the silver was polished until it gleamed like water, and the air was thick with anticipation. Roland Moreno had invited the most influential families of Bellwood to witness what he hoped would be the beginning of a powerful alliance. His daughters floated through the hall in silks and jewels, each of them hoping Adrian would finally make a choice among them. Elena, dressed in her plainest gown as always, helped the maids carry platters of roasted lamb and bowls of fruit. Careful not to draw attention, Adrian entered the hall in a simple dark suit, refusing the ostentation of his hosts. His eyes sought Elena first before acknowledging the sisters who swarmed around him with their rehearsed smiles. Amara, still in her disguise as Mara the maid, positioned herself along the edge of the hall. Her heart thumped, for she knew tonight could not pass without the truth surfacing. She had watched, tested, and measured each heart in this family. Now it was time for her son to make his decision, and for her own mask to fall. Dinner began with Roland raising a toast. To family, to loyalty, and to futures joined in prosperity, he declared, his voice booming. Guests clinked glasses, and the sisters leaned closer to Adrian, each hoping to be the one chosen. Adrian, however, remained calm, his gaze distant until he noticed Elena carefully serving wine to an elderly guest at the far end of the table. She bent slightly so the man wouldn't strain his arm, and when he whispered thanks, she smiled with genuine warmth. Adrian's lips curved slightly as though no one else existed in the room. The sisters, noticing his gaze yet again, stiffened. Clara, desperate, cleared her throat and said loudly, Adrian, have you thought about which one of us you might like to know better? Father has often spoken of the bonds between our families. Guests looked up expectantly. Roland beamed. Certain the evening was heading toward his desired conclusion. Adrian set his glass down. I have thought about it, he said, his voice steady. The hall hushed. And I know clearly now that the one I wish to stand beside is not among those paraded with jewels. His eyes turned toward Elena. It is she, the one who shows kindness when no one is watching, who endures cruelty without bitterness, who treats the lowest with respect. Gasps rippled through the hall. Elena froze, nearly dropping the tray in her hands. Celine's face flushed crimson. Adrian, surely you jest. Elena? She is only here by our charity. Yvette's voice rose sharply. She will drag your name into the mud. Marina shook her head violently. She has no pedigree, no dowry, nothing to offer you. And Lucia, almost shrieking, added, she's cursed. Haven't you heard the whispers? Adrian stood, his presence commanding the room. I care nothing for dowries or pedigrees. What I seek is a heart of truth. And in this house, hers is the only one I've found. He reached out his hand toward Elena, who trembled, unsure whether to take it. The guests murmured, some shocked, some smiling, but all riveted. Just then, a man in dark robes entered the hall, and an unfamiliar pastor summoned by the sisters in their final desperate attempt. He raised his voice theatrically. Beware, the girl you choose carries a shadow upon her soul. She is cursed, and misfortune will follow your house if you wed her. Gasps echoed. Celine clutched Roland's arm, feigning horror. The sisters smirked triumphantly, believing their plan flawless. But in the corner, the housemaid Rosa, who had overheard their plotting earlier, hurried to Amara's side, whispering urgently, Amara nodded, her eyes narrowing. She stepped forward, no longer hunched like a maid but standing tall, her presence commanding. Gasps filled the hall as some recognized her instantly. "Lady Amara," one guest whispered. "What is she doing here?" Amara's voice carried across the table. "Enough of this charade." She looked at the pastor. This man was paid by the Moreno daughters to spread lies. Rosa heard them with her own ears. Rosa stepped forward bravely, bowing her head. "It's true. They begged him to condemn Elena so she would lose Adrian forever." The sisters' faces drained of color. Roland slammed his fist against the table. "Is this true?" he roared. The pastor stammered, unable to deny it. Guests erupted in murmurs of disgust. Clara tried to defend herself. "We only wish to protect the family name." But Adrian's voice cut through, sharp as steel. "You sought only to protect your pride. And in doing so, you revealed everything I needed to know." Elena, stunned, looked from Adrian to Amara, her mind whirling. Amara stepped closer, her eyes softening. As she addressed her, "My name is Lady Amara. I came here in disguise to see the truth for myself. I wanted to find not a woman of beauty or wealth for my son, but one of kindness and strength. And Elena, you have shown me that and more." Tears welled in Elena's eyes. I don't know what to say," she whispered. Adrian took her hand, firmly, steadying her. "Say yes," he murmured with a smile. "Say yes to building a life with me, despite everything." For a moment, the hall seemed to hold its breath. Elena's voice trembled, but she nodded. "Yes." Cheers rose from some guests, though the Morenos sat in stunned silence. Celine turned away, ashamed, while Roland muttered under his breath about lost opportunities. The sisters, defeated, lowered their heads, their schemes exposed before all of Bellwood's elite. But Amara only looked at Elena with pride, knowing she had chosen wisely. The wedding followed weeks later, not in the Moreno mansion, but in a modest chapel filled with warmth and sincerity. Adrian stood tall, Elena radiant by his side, and Amara watched from the front row with tears she did not bother to hide. She thought of her late husband, whispering in her heart, "I did it, love. Our son will not be alone." Elena vowed her life to Adrian, not with promises of riches, but with promises of loyalty and love. Adrian vowed to protect her, not from whispers or rumors, but from the loneliness she had endured too long. And as they sealed their vows, the bells of Bellwood rang clear, announcing not just a union, but a triumph of kindness over cruelty. Amara stood, her hands clasped, her heart full. The disguise had ended, the tests were complete, and the future shone brightly before them. Elena had walked through fire without letting her heart harden, and now she stepped into a life where she would finally be cherished. The story closed not with the fall of the Moreno daughters, though they had been exposed, but with the rise of a young woman who had once been overlooked. It was proof that even in houses of glittering lies, truth can survive, love can grow, and kindness can triumph. Moral lesson: in every home, behind polished doors and perfect smiles, truth waits to be seen. Elena's journey reminds us that titles, wealth, and appearances fade, but kindness leaves a mark that cannot be erased. Love flourishes where hearts are sincere, and courage shines when lies collapse. If you ever doubt your worth, remember, you are not defined by whispers or cruelty, but by the light you carry. Share this story if it touched you. Subscribe for more tales of hope, and leave a comment with the lesson you found most powerful. Together, we remind each other, kindness always wins.